So we're delighted to have you both here with us today, and we hope that all of you here in the audience will join in the debate and challenge and ask questions later on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bettany. Bettany and I, when we met a couple of weeks ago, compared our recent summer holiday experiences. She'd spent the time in a place called Butrid in Albania, which is an archaeological dig, sponsored by Jacob Rothschild.
Yeah, so it had its benefits. It wasn't quite as testing as it sounds to spend your summer in Albania.
I think I can trump it. I spent some time on a monastery called Mount Athos, on the northern peninsula of Greece, where famously no women are allowed at all. And I spent time with a lot of monks who were trying to live a lifestyle of 1,000 years ago, the lifestyle that would be very similar to what the monks did all that time ago. We ate bread and peas, we woke up at 5:30 in the morning and attended 4-hour services, and it was tough actually, but it was very fascinating as well. And I don't think anyone has any doubt of the allure of the past in places like this. We're recalling a simpler age, a perhaps more genuine age. But Bettany is a historian, I'm a journalist. We work in very different time frames, and I, to some extent, concern myself all the time with the moment, now, immediacy. And what I worry is that sometimes perhaps this veneration for the past is a sort of form of default cultural nostalgia. And, you know, like sitting down and watching those historical period dramas on the BBC, supposedly for their coruscating insights into the human condition, but actually it's because we quite like the frocks and the strange moustaches, and they make us laugh. So I wanted to kind of probe this idea, great things take time, they poke around a bit. And Bettany, first I wanted to ask you, it's quite a recent idea, isn't it, this veneration of the past, because all these great ruins and treasures of ancient civilizations lay perfectly happy among the weeds and the undergrowth for centuries and centuries. And then about 200 or 300 years ago, some Europeans went there during the time of the Enlightenment and thought, well, okay, these things are really pretty cool. And thus began this whole movement. So we're talking quite a recent phenomenon, no?
Well, I'd say there's certainly a renaissance of an interest in the past now. As you said, I'm a historian, I write history books, I make history television programmes, and I'm delighted to say, as are my agents, that these sell very well all around the world. So clearly there's an international interest in the past. But actually, I think it starts a lot earlier than just 300 years ago. We are creatures of memory. As a species, we live and we learn by acquiring knowledge, by processing it, by remembering it, and then acting on it. So we cannot survive without memory. And what's really interesting for me as a historian is if you look at the very, very early civilizations, so right back to the Bronze Age, so we're talking, you know, 3,500, 4,000 years ago, and even then, when you'd think that people would be desperately trying to charge forward into the future, they still loved the past. If you look at the beautiful palaces, I've got a picture here of one of the Mycenaean palaces. This is Nestor's palace at Pylos. This is a reconstruction of a throne room in Nestor's palace. And in these palaces, they actually had Egyptian halls because they loved the idea that they could acquire. They were kind of antiquities collectors even back then. Because for them, a made in Egypt kite mark was the kind of stamp of authority and of a brand that really worked. So they thought that even then, people did things better back in the early days. If you look, I don't know if you can see these paintings on the walls. I mean, those aren't just kind of fanciful fairy tales. These were things which told those communities what had happened in the past, who had been great, and how they'd been great. And so these were creatures, I said, who actually only survived by looking back to the past. For them, the future was a kind of Frankenstein of the gods. Nobody could tell what was going to happen in the future, but all the answers lay in the past. And when you look at what they were referring to, you can understand why. I mean, we still marvel at the wonders of ancient Egypt today. They did too back then. This is obviously the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid at Giza. That pyramid took 18 years to construct. It was constructed not by slaves, as everybody would always tell you. When you were at school, I bet everybody said, oh, you know, you had these lines of slaves who were forced to build this pyramid for evil pharaohs. Actually, that's not the case at all. We now think it was citizens of Egypt who built the pyramids as an offering to the gods. For them, this was bringing each and every one of them closer to the gods. So they had a real investment in it. And the Greeks recognised this, and they recognised that the ancient culture of Egypt itself was 3,000 years old. So for them, time really mattered. So though it's a nice idea that when we worry about the world, we kind of scurry back to the past for nostalgia, actually, I don't think that's true. I think it's something much more fundamental, much more instinctive, and actually much more genetic. I think we are who we are because of the past.
Yeah, presumably these ancients, these were extraordinary civilizations simply because they were willing to put so much time and craft and effort. You know, here I am, I've got this master plan, this could take 20 years, okay, do it, let's go for it. You know, they thought about their own time. Would they think we were all being a little bit decadent here, just sort of sitting around in a lecture theatre, asking this question, does the past matter? And of all things, prompted by a discussion about luxury whiskey.
So they were building the pyramids, and we were talking about bottles of booze. You know what? Actually, I'd say exactly the opposite. Because the ancients loved luxury drinks. This was terribly important to them. Right at the birth of civilization itself, so back in those Bronze Age palaces that I was talking about, because people thought that alcohol was actually a gift of the gods, they venerated it, and they understood that it was a way of bringing people together, you know, of allowing people to communicate, to get on. And also, actually, even back then, a kind of demonstration that you'd really made it because you could afford a certain amount of beautiful, fine wine. In that palace that I was showing you in Pylos, it's been excavated recently, and they've discovered no fewer than 2,856 huge drinking cups. And they're drinking cups about this size. So if you can imagine that, that's quite a lot of alcohol that you can fit into those cups. This is actually a rather beautiful fresco from the Palace of Knossos on Crete. And we also have from the Palace of Pylos a little kind of laundry list, a sort of shopping list, saying that they need to order in 17,000 litres of wine. So I think they would have approved of this because, as I said, for them, they actually recognised that this was a thing that wasn't just an add-on. It was a way that brought people together. I've tasted, I have to say, I think we've moved on a bit in our creation of alcohol. What you can do now is that you can analyse the insides of these cups that you see. So if you dig them out of the ground, you can actually physically look at what residues are left inside the pottery. So we know exactly what they were drinking back in the Bronze Age. Complete aside, actually they're also taking a lot of opiates, so I think they had a fine time. I think personally all those stories of Homer, you know, the Odyssey and things, all built up because they were high as kites the whole time. Anyway, I digress. But what's really interesting, if you look at what they were drinking, it was a killer cocktail, a mixture of honey mead and retsina and wine. And I tell you, if you try to drink that, you're on the floor within about 5 minutes. But it was just interesting, I was actually thinking, watching that film before, archaeologists in 3,000 years' time are going to be looking at your oak barrels and analysing them and seeing how it was that you created this fine wine for the palatial cultures of the 21st century. So they definitely, as I said, I think actually they're quite approved of this discussion and, you know, the debates of time and wine.
Yeah. And it's true to say, isn't it, that some of the great works of ancient Greek philosophy were founded on these rather extraordinary evenings of wining and dining.
Well, they were. I mean, famously, the symposium, you know, Plato's symposium, where Socrates, with a kind of similar number of people to there are in the room now, would have lain around on these benches and debated the great things of life, you know, what is good, what is happiness, what is virtue. All these things happened in the context of a drinking party. A symposium actually means a drinking together. That's what the word means. So, you know, philosophy and this kind of culture of coming together to drink wine and other alcohol was very important. What was also very interesting to know, and our regulators today would be delighted to hear it, there was always a symposiarch in charge of symposiums. So there was one person who was nominated to check that nobody drank too immoderately. So they used to check that people wouldn't get legless, basically, and they'd water the wine as well. So they drank, you know, very, very responsibly. I have to say, I'm not so sure that's true of British culture. We liked drinking very early. We know this from the Iron Age finds. I'm just going to show you an amazing tankard that was only found a few years ago near Newport, which is made of wood and copper, and it contains 4 pints worth of some kind of alcoholic brew. So I mean, that's a serious amount of alcohol. But again, this was not just for a party. This would have been shared between kings and queens of the day. And then the reason we've got this thing is that it was left as a gift to the gods in the water, which is why it survived. It's a very short little film, but if you go online and look at itv.com, Britain's Secret Treasures, you'll be able to watch the whole thing.